Honour all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honour the King. Hello, I'm Pastor Charmley. Welcome back to Bethel Evangelical Free Church Hanley on YouTube. I quoted from 1 Peter. Peter speaks of honouring the King. The word there is the word really for the Roman Emperor. And in this video I want to talk about a particular emperor, not of ancient Rome, but of the Holy Roman Empire. This year we are remembering Martin Luther at the Diet of Worms in 1521, 500 years ago, one half of a millennium ago. And when we think of Luther at the Diet of Worms, we must think also of the man whom he faced at the Diet. What a contrast between the thin, worn-looking monk who had just suffered from a bout of ill health as a result of his arduous journey from Wittenberg, and the majestic Emperor Charles V. And in this video I'm going to be drawing quite a lot on this book and talking about this book really. Geoffrey Parker, Emperor, A New Life of Charles V. Charles V was the grandson of the Emperor Maximilian. He was a boy who was born in the Netherlands. His native language was French. He came from what we today would think of as Belgium, although the whole of the Netherlands, Belgium, and what we today call the Netherlands were all one realm. And they were part of the possessions of the Habsburgs, that great and mighty family. That family who, however, were guilty to a great extent of abusing their own gene pool, or when we say gene pool, it was to some extent rather sort of a muddy puddle of inbreeding and interbreeding, and the result is that Charles looked like that. He was a man who could rarely close his mouth. He couldn't close his mouth properly at all, in fact. He suffered from inbreeding. He was a faithful Roman Catholic, a faithful medieval Catholic of the period. He was not a man in any way sympathetic to Martin Luther, and yet he shared some of Luther's concerns. But more to the point, he was a politician. And the thing about politicians is, one of the things politicians have to think of is, what about the people who elected me? Well, he was an emperor. Yes, but the Holy Roman Emperor was elected. That's why the prince of the portion of Saxony in which Martin Luther lived was called the Elector of Saxony, because he was one of those men, that small group of men who got together when the old emperor died and they voted for a new one. And so literally Charles had to think about the people who elected him, and he had to think about the promises he'd made when he was running for election. It's strange, isn't it, to think about a mighty emperor, a man who ruled a nation that has long since passed into history, who ruled an empire that is very strange to us, the Holy Roman Empire, because it's not like Great Britain. Now, we are a single realm. We have one monarch and one parliament. And yes, you've got these spun-off, devolved assemblies, but the main political power is in London. And that political power has then sent off some of its power up to Edinburgh, some across the Irish Sea to Northern Ireland, to Stormont, and some off to Cardiff in Wales. But the power is that of the Parliament. There was no Parliament of the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire consisted of a series of independent states with their own rulers, who then had their great overlord, the emperor. And he had his own domains. Charles' domains were the Netherlands and Spain. His mother was the heir to the throne, but had by this point become the joint throne of Spain, Castile and Aragon. And she was known as Joanna the Mad. She had mental health issues. And the thing was, in the Middle Ages, the early modern period, really into the later modern period, what you did if you were a ruler and you had somebody in the family with mental health issues was you shut them up in a tower somewhere in a castle and forgot about them. And that's what Charles did with his mother. He ruled in her name. He got her to sign documents that said, my son Charles is my heir, my successor, and my regent. And the regency power was a great thing to have, because if you were a regent, then it meant that you were basically the king in all but name. So it was with him. Charles had a difficult upbringing. His father died when he was very young. His mother had mental health issues. He's brought up really by one of his aunts. And when his grandfather died rather, the Emperor Maximilian, he found himself facing an election. Maximilian had tried to bribe the electors. He tried to buy the empire for his grandson, but his grandson had not really paid very much attention, hadn't done what was exactly needed of him to do this. And then his grandfather dies unexpectedly, and there's an election. And the German princes say, as electors very often do, look, if we just vote for the heir immediately, if we just vote for Charles immediately, then the Habsburgs will get this idea that the empire's theirs by right of succession. But actually, we vote for them. So what we'll do is we'll make sure it's contested. And so some of the German electors go, and they go to the King of France, Francis I, and they say, well, Francis, won't you run for the Holy Roman Empire? Won't you announce your candidacy? Henry VIII wanted to get involved, but Henry VIII is off here in England, and quite frankly, he didn't have the clout, didn't have the influence on the continent to be able to get himself elected. So there is a contest, and the contest is very largely decided because, of course, it's not a secret ballot. The contest is very largely decided by the fact that Charles has bigger pockets, and so he's able to hand out more ducats to the electors, and the electors are really good. And so, of course, one of the things that we'd like from you if you get elected is that you give us more power, and you tell that Pope off in Rome to stop trying to get all this money out of the Germans, because we don't want to be paying all this money to these degenerate Italians down there. And that's how they felt. And so that's what happens. And then the whole Luther business breaks out. What's Charles to do with Luther? Well, Charles is a faithful Catholic. He's a Spanish king. His own country, or the country where his mother comes from, the country where one of his main power bases is a country that is famed for the Inquisition and for burning people at the stake for being heretics. So here's a man who is, I am a Catholic. In fact, he says at the Diet of Worms that he's absolutely determined to live and die a Catholic. Just grab wasn't what I thought it was. And Atkinson again, the trial of Luther. And Atkinson gives us a wonderful section from Charles as he declares his position. And he declares, you know that I am a descendant of the most Christian emperors of the great German people, of Catholic kings of Spain, of the Archdukes of Austria and the Dukes of Burgundy. All of these their whole life long were faithful sons of the Roman Church. They were the defenders at all times of the Catholic faith, its sacred ceremonies, decrees and ordinances, and its holy rites to the honour of God. And so he goes on to say, I am therefore resolved to maintain everything which these my forebears have established to the present. He's no friend of Luther. But he's got these electors, and he's made these promises to the electors. And so when Martin Luther says, I appeal to the emperor, and when Luther is summoned to the Diet, and then Luther, of course, goes on and burdens the Pope's papal bull condemning him, and the Pope says, well, that's it, he's excommunicated, and Charles, you shouldn't have anything to do with him. And Charles replies, I want to listen to the man. Of course, what Charles actually thinking is, I made some promises when I was elected, and things could get very sticky for me. Because it's not like in a modern electoral system, it's not like in our country where if a politician has made some promises in an election and then decides to break them when he's Prime Minister, then he just gets punished at the ballot boxes. If Charles has made promises and he breaks them, he's going to get punished by a bunch of very angry Germans with swords, spears, lances, and basically big armies. In other words, he's going to have a war on his hands. And the one thing that a brand new, he's only been elected very, very recently. He's only been in 1519 he's been elected. So he's a very new monarch. He's a very new emperor, and he needs these men on board. He also needs to say to these men, look, you can trust me. So if I ask you to help me, then you don't have to go, he's going to do the dirty on me at some point. Whereas if, of course, he does the dirty on them very, very early on the reign, says, oh, I'm now the emperor, I don't have to do what you want me to do, well, he's had it. He's going to get revolts and rebellions everywhere. And he can't afford that, so he says, no, let Luther come to Worms. He gives him a safe conduct. There are those who say, well, Jan Hus was given a safe conduct, just over 100 years ago, and that was then disregarded. Emperor Sigismund was bullied into saying, oh, he's a heretic, you can kill him. And look how that worked out for Sigismund, says Charles to himself. But also, again, if I break my word, then I am in trouble, because they go, well, we can't trust the man. And also, rebellion down the line. So Charles has to listen. Charles has to listen to Luther. He feels he has to honour his word. But the other thing is that Charles is the kind of man who did honour his word. After Luther's death, there was a war between the Empire and some of the Lutheran princes, the Schmalkaldic League. And the Emperor's forces take the city of Wittenberg rather, where Luther's buried. And Wittenberg surrenders. The Emperor and one of his generals stride into the castle church where Luther preached, where Luther's buried. And the general says, dig him up and burn him. And the Emperor replies, no. Let him rest there until Judgment Day. Another general pipes up. Burn him! Burn him! I make war against the living, Charles replied, not the dead. What an honourable man he seemed at that time. Now, he was a man who was quite willing to play dirty when it suited him. But he comes across, and certainly this book again, Park, he comes across as an honourable man. It is a brick. I mean, it's a brick. It's a brick with pages and pages and pages of footnotes. It's that kind of book. It takes us from his origins through to his death and afterwards. His death, after he retired, he abdicated, he retired off to a monastery in Spain with beautiful new water gardens, and promptly got malaria and died, which is what happens if you have water gardens in that part of the world. And the question is asked at the end of this. Parker asked the question, did the Emperor die a Lutheran? That was a question I'd never heard. Did he die a Lutheran? This is a man who said, I will live and die in the faith of my fathers. Well, Martin Luther felt the same. Martin Luther didn't think he died some different kind of Christian. He felt that the Pope had wandered off and he was the Catholic. Did the Emperor die a Lutheran? The man who attended him on his deathbed would die in a prison in Rome following accusations of heresy that he was Lutheran. At the time, the Archbishop who attended him on his deathbed said to him, trust in the merits of Christ alone. And people looking around said, that sounds a bit Lutheran. He had two men he appointed as his royal chaplains. One of them was burned at the stake as a Lutheran. The other one wasn't burned at the stake because he died first. So he's burned in effigy instead. There was a French Bible among the king's possessions, among the emperor's possessions when he died. There were books that were regarded as heretical. We don't know. Did he become a Lutheran at the end of his life? We don't know. But it's an interesting suggestion that the man who heard Luther at Worms, and certainly was impressed by him, man who, when he saw Luther's grave, said, "Leave him alone. Leave him till Judgment Day. Let God deal with him now that he's dead." Did he have some sympathy for Luther? It would be nice to think that he did. In some sense, it would be nice to think that he and Martin Luther are together in heaven, but we don't know. But it's a fascinating book. It's very readable for a brick like this, and I would recommend it and commend it. Much worth reading. There'll be a link to the publisher, a link with information about price in the description of this video. And once again, I get absolutely no royalty. I get absolutely no commission for advertising this stuff. This is just, I enjoyed this book. I think people will. Well, thank you for watching, and may God help us to indeed seek to be loyal, to be trustworthy, to be the sort of people who, even if we disagree with somebody, we can be honourable towards them. Because that's what Luther was towards Charles, and that's what Charles was, surprisingly, towards Luther. But most of all, let us be people who, like Martin Luther, look to God's word. And just as the Archbishop said to Charles on his deathbed, trust in the merits of Christ alone. Well, thank you for watching, and may God bless you and keep you, looking unto Jesus, for his name's sake.